The chandeliers blazed above like captured stars, their light spilling over silk gowns, polished marble, and the thousand watching eyes that filled the grand ballroom. Ethan Vance stood at the altar, tall and composed, his tailored black suit fitting like armor. Every inch of him radiated control, except for the tightness in his jaw and the faint twitch in his hand as the string quartet played the bridal march. He wasn't nervous. CEOs didn't get nervous. He was furious. Furious that he had been maneuvered into this marriage. Furious that his board had tied his empire to a family he barely knew. And furious that he had been told with false sympathy that his bride was not much to look at, but practical. He had built an empire worth billions, and now he was being handed a woman like a business transaction. The crowd watched him expectantly, whispering behind their fans, speculating about the powerful CEO's mysterious bride. No one had seen her face. She was hidden behind a thick veil of ivory lace that reached her fingertips, moving slowly toward him down the aisle, as if walking through a dream she didn't want to wake from. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Her steps were graceful, too graceful for the timid, awkward woman he had been led to expect. Something in the way she carried herself, the poise in her shoulders, the quiet rhythm of her breathing didn't fit the picture painted for him. His pulse quickened against his will. The music swelled, the guests rose, and the veiled woman stopped before him. Ethan felt a dozen cameras flash like lightning. His mother dabbed at her eyes with a diamond handkerchief. The priest's voice floated through the golden air, solemn and patient, but Ethan barely heard it. He could feel her presence, soft, trembling, real. Her gloved hands reached out for his, and for a moment he hesitated. Then his fingers closed around hers. Her touch startled him. It wasn't the timid, cold grip of someone terrified of being unwanted. It was firm yet delicate, a silent statement that she was here not to be pitied or rescued, but because she had chosen to stand there. He looked at her through the veil, trying to make out the shape of her face. All he could see were the faint outlines of her lips, the curve of her cheek, the hint of something luminous. He forced himself to look away, jaw tightening again. This was business. He had promised to do what was necessary for the company's survival. Love had no place here. The ceremony moved forward like a slow procession through fog. The priest spoke of unity, of trust, of promises that lasted longer than lifetimes. Ethan repeated his vows mechanically, his voice smooth and deep but hollow. Yet every time her voice answered his, something flickered inside. Ethan's breath hitched, the weight of his own disbelief pressing down on him. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The orchestra's final note faded into the high ceilings of the ballroom, dissolving into a stunned hush. Guests exchanged glances, unsure whether to clap or whisper. The woman before him, his bride, was nothing like the quiet, plain creature he'd imagined. Her face, though pale from nervousness, carried an unspoken strength. Her features were soft yet striking, the kind that held a room without demanding it. But it was her eyes that captured him completely, deep, warm, and trembling like the surface of a lake disturbed by wind. She blinked and a tear slipped down her cheek, catching the light like a crystal. It wasn't sadness, it was relief. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, something that made him forget the audience, the cameras, even his pride. The priest's gentle voice broke the spell, asking him to seal their vows with a kiss. Ethan hesitated again, unsure if this was real or some elaborate illusion orchestrated by the board to trap him. The guests were waiting, phones raised, every movement recorded. But when she looked at him, really looked not as a billionaire, not as the man everyone feared in the boardroom, but as a person, his hesitation vanished. Slowly, he leaned forward, his hand brushing the side of her face. Her skin was cool beneath his touch, delicate but alive, and her lips parted slightly in surprise before he kissed her, soft and brief. The applause that followed was thunderous, but he barely heard it. He had kissed countless women in his life, all beautiful, confident, and sure of their charm. But this felt like something breaking open inside him, something raw and unfamiliar. When they turned to face the crowd as husband and wife, Ethan caught sight of his board members in the front row, all smiling like satisfied gamblers who'd just won a high-stakes bet. His stomach twisted. He'd been a pawn in their plan, a CEO manipulated by family legacy and profit. Yet as he glanced at his new wife beside him, her hands folded calmly in front of her, he couldn't summon the anger he expected. Instead, a strange protectiveness stirred. He didn't even know her name. Beyond the formal introduction of Miss Ava Rutherford, she hadn't said a single word to him since the ceremony began, and yet her silence spoke volumes of grace under pressure, of a quiet dignity that refused to beg or boast. After the reception, they escaped to the courtyard for a moment of quiet. The air was cool, fragrant with roses, and the wedding night unfolded in silence, heavy with questions neither of them dared to voice. Ethan followed Ava into the suite, its wide French windows overlooking the city skyline glittering like a sea of stars. The air smelled faintly of roses and champagne, and yet it felt suffocating. He removed his jacket, tossing it carelessly over a chair, then paused when he saw her standing near the window. She had unpinned her hair, and it cascaded down her back in soft waves, glowing under the amber light. She looked fragile like porcelain, but there was something in her posture, straight, composed, that stopped him from speaking carelessly. He was used to command, to control, but in her presence words felt inadequate. "You don't have to pretend," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know you didn't want this." Ethan froze. "It's not that simple," he replied, though he knew it was exactly that. He hadn't wanted to marry. He hadn't wanted to be forced into anything that wasn't on his terms. But now, staring at her reflection in the window, he couldn't bring himself to say it aloud. She turned to face him, her eyes glistening but calm. "You think I wanted this either?" she asked softly. "You think I dreamed of standing beside a man who looked at me like I was an obligation?" Her words hit harder than he expected. Ethan, who'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, suddenly found himself at a loss. "That's not what I meant," he began, but she shook her head gently. "You don't have to explain," she said. "We both know why we're here." She moved to the vanity, removing the heavy jewelry piece by piece, each clink against the wooden surface echoing in the stillness. Ethan watched her, his chest tightening with something that felt dangerously close to guilt. There was a kind of beauty in her restraint, in the way she didn't lash out or demand sympathy. She simply existed with quiet strength, as though she had already accepted the pain that came with her new reality. Finally, he broke the silence. "Why didn't they tell me who you were?" She looked at him through the mirror. "Because they didn't want you to choose me for the wrong reason," she said. "They thought if you saw my face, you'd think this was about beauty, not business." Ethan frowned, stepping closer. "They said things. They made me believe," his voice faltered, "that I was plain." She finished. The days that followed were unlike anything Ethan had known before. The mansion that once echoed with the cold rhythm of his footsteps now carried the faint sounds of laughter, hers. Ava's presence was quiet but transformative. She didn't demand space. She filled it effortlessly. She spoke softly to the staff, remembered their names, and even smiled at the driver who had served Ethan for years but never dared to make eye contact. Every gesture of hers seemed to draw warmth into a house that had been built for power, not comfort. Ethan noticed it all, though he tried to hide how much it affected him. He had never realized how sterile his life had been. His meetings, his success, his solitude, until she began to color it with small, human details. One morning as he came down the stairs, he found her arranging fresh lilies in the entrance hall. "You could have told the staff to do that," he said casually. She glanced up, her smile faint but kind. "I could," she replied, "but then it wouldn't mean anything." That simple answer stayed with him for hours. At work, his colleagues noticed something different too. The once irritable CEO seemed distracted, almost human. During a board meeting, one of his partners made a sly comment about his new wife, something about her being unexpectedly decent-looking. The laughter that followed was cut short when Ethan's gaze snapped up, his voice low and cold. "Say that again," he said, and the room fell silent. His anger was not the loud, explosive kind. It was sharp, restrained, dangerous. No one dared to speak after that. When he returned home that evening, Ava was reading in the library, curled in a velvet armchair, the golden light from the fire painting her face. "You defended me today," she said without looking up. Ethan blinked, startled. "How did you?" She smiled. "People talk." He hesitated, then shrugged, his voice rougher than intended. "You didn't deserve their disrespect." She looked up then, her eyes calm but glistening. "Thank you," she said simply. And for the first time, gratitude from someone meant more to him than applause from shareholders. Slowly, without realizing it, Ethan began to change. He started coming home earlier, Not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Sometimes, he would find her in the garden at dusk, barefoot, her dress brushing through the lavender as she watered the plants herself. They began to talk not about contracts or mergers, but about things he'd forgotten he once cared for. She told him she loved painting sunsets, but never signed her work because she thought beauty didn't need ownership. He told her how his father's death had left him, chasing success as if it could fill the silence that followed. They listened, really listened, until silence no longer felt empty between them. But the world outside wasn't ready to believe their peace. Rumors began to swirl. Gossip that Ava had married him for wealth, that she had deceived him with her. It was late one evening when Ethan found Ava standing on the balcony, her dress fluttering in the cool wind, her hair catching the faint glow of the city lights below. The storm had passed, leaving the air clean and still, the scent of rain clinging to everything. He watched her for a moment, wondering how someone so gentle could carry herself with such strength. She turned when she sensed him there, her eyes soft and knowing. "You're quiet tonight," she said. He stepped closer, his gaze tracing her face, every detail etched into his memory. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "about how wrong I was." She tilted her head slightly. "About what?" He took a deep breath. "About everything. About you. About what I thought mattered." He reached for her hand, holding it as though afraid she might disappear. "When this began, I thought I was being trapped, that I was the victim of someone else's game, but now I see that you were the only truth in a world full of lies." Ava smiled faintly, her fingers tightening around his. "You were never trapped, Ethan," she whispered. "You were just lost." The honesty in her words struck him harder than any confession. He had built walls so high that no one dared climb them, convinced that power could shield him from pain. But standing there, looking at the woman he had once doubted, he realized that love was not a weakness. It was the courage to see another soul without defense. The wind carried her hair across her face, and he brushed it back gently, his touch lingering. "You changed everything," he said. "You made me remember what it feels like to care, to trust, to be human again." Tears glimmered in her eyes, though she smiled through them. "And you taught me that even the coldest heart can still learn to love." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as the city hummed softly below. The world that had once felt like a battlefield now seemed distant, irrelevant. In her warmth he found peace he had never known. "I thought I was tricked into this marriage," he murmured against her hair. "And now?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Ethan drew back just enough to look into her eyes, his voice breaking as he whispered, "Now I know I was saved by it." She smiled, tears spilling freely down her cheeks, and for the first time they kissed not out of obligation, not because of vows or expectations, but because their hearts had finally found each other. The lights below shimmered like fallen stars, and in that quiet moment, two strangers bound by circumstance became something real, something that no contract, no rumor, no past could ever undo.